Hello and welcome back to our next English lesson. And we're going to continue to create our toolkit. We're going to be looking at the grammar features of the model text. Once again, we're going to go through the model text and then we're going to break it down and see which different features there are in there that might help us when we come to write our model text. So, first off, this is our model text, same as we have had all along. We're going to read it through very quickly. Again, we're going to try reading it in a different order. The only one that needs to be in the same place when we're reading this out is the introduction. The introduction can't be read. It has to be read first in order for it to fit in with everybody else. All the other paragraphs, sorry. And the other one that would demand to be read at a certain point is if you had a finishing paragraph. And that finishing paragraph would need to be read at the end in order for it all to make sense all together. So let's have a look. We have the Anglo-Saxon Society. The Saxon people didn't all have great lives. Wealthy or not, all of them had endured some hard times. Despite this, society was split into three categories: the Saxon nobility and the upper classes, e.g. the kings, ealdormen, and thanes, like landlords. Next were all the commoners, who were the ceorls, who were a group consisting of farmers and craftsmen. Lastly, slaves, or thralls, whose lives were hard and mostly miserable. The bottom of the social structure in Anglo-Saxon times consisted of the slaves, who were called bondsmen or thralls. Slaves were either prisoners captured during wars, Britons native from Great Britain, or Saxons falling into debt, who literally had to sell themselves into slavery. They didn't have many rights under law, and they could be harshly punished without thought of justice. Punishment, which includes being killed, was easily received for slaves. Social hierarchy. Overall, the social hierarchy in the Anglo-Saxon England was regarded fair and created a perfect solution for two main needs at the time. One was the organised workforce, whose duties were clearly defined by their stations. And secondly, an army which could be constructed and taken to the field with minimum preparation. Commoners. Commoners in Anglo-Saxon period known as ceorls were the craftsmen and farmers. These were the majority of people. While some were successful landowners, there were some agricultural labourers under their landlord's rights. Although all were craftsmen and farmers, they could all be summoned to join the Fríd. And if they were called, they were required by law to join. The Fríd was an army of poorly armed fighters who had not undergone any training at all. The commoners could not afford their own weapons and armour, which meant their chances in a fight were not great. The best weapons they were able to acquire were spears, but most were only armed with hammers, axes, and scythes, which were easily accessible through their work. Nobility in the upper classes. The Anglo-Saxon upper class and nobility consisted of the kings, aldermen, and thanes. The nobility was led by the kings, who ruled over large areas of lands called kingdoms. Next were the aldermen, who controlled the various districts on behalf of the ruler. The aldermen had significant power that was often responsible for law and order, therefore were tasked with providing justice. There was also in charge of militias, which was formed by local commoners in times of war. Below the aldermen were the thanes. The thanes were the professional military in service to either the king or the alderman. Some served the king and had the possibility to gain a place in the king's home. While others owned lands in their own right, these thanes had the duty to create a solid foundation for the army to fight for the kingdom. When they were not actively on duty in the military, they took care of local organisations, both of men-at-arms and trade routes. So that's our model text. Quick reminder here of our key vocab. We had endured, nobility, hierarchy, agriculture, acquire, accessible, districts, professional, organisations, society and punishment. And if you need a brief recap of what some of those words might mean, you can always go back and look at our video around the key vocab. So let's go look at our toolkit as it has been created so far. And these are the structural parts of our toolkit. We have the title, which tells the reader what the report is about. We have the subheadings, which allows the reader to see what each of the information paragraphs are talking about and can direct them to the bit that they're interested in. We have an introduction paragraph, which explains what the report or the long code report is going to talk about briefly, and a finishing paragraph in some non-code reports, which link the information to the reader or real life in some way. The next thing you'd have is all the information paragraphs, and these are the core part of our non-chronological report and give us all the information that we need in order for us to learn anything new. We also have at the beginning of every information paragraph a topic sentence, and this first sentence in the paragraph explains what that paragraph is going to talk about. So a reader can read that first line, have an idea of the information coming up, and can decide at that point whether that's the information they need. Next, we have the additional parts which go alongside all the information. And they're the images and diagrams which help us see what is meant in the report. It's a visual prompt to the information. A caption or key that goes alongside those images or diagrams just to give a brief explanation of what they are. And then you can find fact boxes, did you know boxes, fact files, some way additional information is shared on the report. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the grammar and sentence level skills that can be used in a non-chronological report and how that can make our reports better. So back to our model text, we're going to draw as much as we can from the model text, and we're going to look at it in two halves. The first half we're going to look at is this half here. We're just going to pull out the things that we can see from this. So first, we have the use of brackets, and this is to show additional information. And we talked about this before when we talked about Beowulf. These come under the classification of a parenthesis. It's an additional piece of information which isn't important to a sentence, but is extra to it. We have colons, which introduce an extended list. In this case, this is going to introduce what the three categories are: the nobility, the commoners, and the slaves. We have fronted adverbials, which can tell the reader when, where, how, or the order in which something happened. And we've talked about this as well. We had a lesson last week about adverbials and how they can be used to help give additional information about that sentence to the reader. And then we also have semicolons, and these for two, they link two closely linked sentences together, two independent clauses. They make sense on their own, but are intrinsically linked. In this case, this is about the two different ideas that are needed at the time: the workforce and the army. And we also have additional information which is split up between two commas, and this is another type of parenthesis. It's an additional piece of information which is given, which isn't necessarily core to the sentence itself, but adds detail to it. Going back and looking at the other half, there's a few more tricks that we can pull out from here. We can see that a hyphen's been used, and this is in the same regard to how a comma and bracket can be used to add additional information. This is the similar idea to a parenthesis. In this case, we are just explaining what the large areas of land are called, and they're called kingdoms. Then we have the king's home. Now this is an apostrophe for ownership. The king owns the home. So the apostrophe, rather than showing earlier on, we talked about led by kings, that was plural, many kings. In this case, this king owns that home. So this apostrophe is telling us that it's ownership. That home is owned by the king. And then we might also have commas in a list. And these columns in a list are separating the types of slave there are: prisoners captured from war, Britons native to Great Britain, or Saxons falling into debt. this is an extended list, but it is still a list, and each object within the list is split by a comma. So let's add that to our overall report. I'm just going to hide myself so you can actually see the entirety of it. So we have semicolons and colons. Semicolons used to link to closely linked sentences or independent clauses, and a colon used to introduce an extended list. We have the use of brackets, hyphens, and commas to show additional information. These are all types of parentheses, those bits that you add into a sentence to give more information. And then we also have fronted adverbials, which gives you more detail, telling a reader where, when, how, or the order in which something might happen. We have apostrophes for ownership, telling us who owned whatever it happens to be. And then we might use commas in it to split up a list so that we don't get each article mixed up. And finally, for this video, we're going to have a look at our short write task. So the short write task today is a random word task. I'm going to give you 3 sets of 3 words each, and what I want you to try and do is add them and make a sentence using them. But what I want you to try and do, and the challenge, is that I want you to think about our toolkit, think about use of parentheses, think about the use of commas in a list, or the use of adverbials, and see if you can include those in each of your sentences. Your first set of words is men-at-arms, which means war fighters, foundation, and nobility. Your second set is weapons, successful, and farmers. And your third set is preparation, commoners, and miserable. All of these words do come from our model text. So each one is a different set. You can see they're a different color. So 1 sentence for each set of words. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.